The family of Mfundo Gaba, who are prominent figures in the KwaZulu-Natal taxi industry, denies in a statement any involvement in the murder of rapper Keenan aka Forbes.
How is Anele normal? That's a question.
Welcome everybody to this special little interview we have this morning with Melinda Ferguson, who finds herself in an eye of a storm again after having published this book, When Love Kills, The Tragic Tale of AKA and Anele. It has kind of resulted in a usual kind of massive discussion going down on social media platforms. What I thought I'd like to do with this interview with Melinda is set the parameters for when people can tell stories and what stories can we tell. As journalists, we have to tell other people's stories all the time, and Section 16 of the Constitution gives us a right to free speech. So, Melinda, you've worked as a journalist for a very long time. You've been involved in other books. We'll get to some of them. Just give us a lowdown of who you are and where you are and how you got into publishing and telling other people's stories as well as your own stories.
Sure, we could take the whole day, but I mean, no, we won't. In 2003, after coming out of a really hectic addiction to heroin and crack, I was given the opportunity to start working as a journalist. So I worked at True Love magazine for 11 years. I did a lot of stories about the characters in this book. Did cover stories with Bonang Mateba, with Zintle, did stories about AKA. So I mean, the characters that I am working with in this book, I knew the territory well, probably wrote 1,000 stories for True Love. I was the features editor as well. And then during my last few years there, I studied an honors in publishing, started publishing in 2012. First book I published was Kelly Khumalo, or second book. I mean, someone might say I was a liar, so it could have been the first or the second, The Story of Kelly Khumalo. I have subsequently published close to 100 books, and they've been very interesting on some levels. A lot of them have been my own, my memoirs, other people's memoirs, but I've also dealt with books like Lindy Wehani's Being Chris Hani's Daughter. I did the Angelo Grizzi book, two completely different types of subjects. I did the Oscar book with Patricia Taylor, Samantha Taylor's mother. I've done a lot of books, and as a journalist, I was very drawn to the story of actually Anele Tembe, because Keenan Forbes had a lot of public let's not say credibility, he had a lot of public presence. He was a big character in our country as a public figure. Anele Tembe, not so much, because she was only 22 when she fell or was pushed.
And let's make no mistake, I think Keenan is a really brilliant musician. If you look at what happened in that last album, it's so unbelievably painful to listen to as well.
Mass country, yeah.
That's right. So what we're saying here is that these are not, we're not writing about people who are, the Grizzi book is something different, but these are people who are in the public eye.
Cultural icons,
and they're there and they're in that space. And it's interesting because Netflix did a Senzo Meria documentary, and that also caused quite a bit of blowback for the guys who made it. I think the accusation people seem to be making now is that it's some invasion of privacy, one is insensitive to the relatives and other people, and that you somehow need permission to tell a story that is already in the public realm. So your approach to this book, was it different from your approach to other books? At this particular point, and you mentioned Anele, and we also need to speak about GBV in South Africa, and all the things we know exist. I mean, in this book, there's an assassination, there's a plummet to death, there's accusations, all those tragedies that befall South Africans is in this book. So it's also part of a wider story.
And a huge story. It was Google has shown it to be one of the most searched stories in the last decade. It's a huge public interest story. 2 people are dead, tragically so. 2 bright, beautiful, talented, amazing 2 people are now both been shot. One's been shot, one's dead on the pavement in Cape Town. And so for me, the tragedy of these 2 people was really evoking a kind of Romeo and Juliet situation for me, a kind of big Shakespearean tragedy, Greek almost. I felt like it was a kind of tragedy there where you could tear your clothes, and have a chorus of Greek women wailing.
And are there lessons in the story? Because of course that's
of course. For me, there are, because I'm a recovering addict, because I know about addiction, I know about toxic relationships. I would love people to look at this book and say, hang on, am I actually in a toxic relationship? What is love? When Love Kills is a very specific title that I chose because I think we've lost the idea around what real love is. I mean, that sounds really cheesy, but people are so confused because of toxic relationships like Rihanna and Chris Brown, Whitney and Bobby, I mean, Oscar and Reva. There were so many examples of relationship that I think especially young people get completely confused by.
Do you think perhaps that, being able to see that is what has triggered some people to say, you're not allowed to tell that story? Maybe it's their own response to something?
I think there's it's almost fascinating on a daily level. I say, what is wrong today? Why? So it's about not getting permission from the parents. Big one. I've always thought, as far as I know as a journalist, which journalist phones parents to write stories about things? I mean, when AKA was accused of being abusive to Anele Thamm in all those videos that were released just after she died, did all those journalists phone parents? No, of course they didn't. There's something about a book.
They should have. If they were going to be quoting parents.
Yeah, well, no, you can't quote.
Then you get, But I think if the story's there, and the parents did speak to the media too. At some point. I mean, I've read quite a bit by her father and others.
Yeah.
So putting the book together, where did you go and what did you do in terms of finding the story and the evidence and, the various versions of what happened? And of course, there's a memorial you can watch.
Well, I mean, I speak in my author's letter about being sickened by myself because I become a voyeur as well. It was necessary for me to become a voyeur of this story by partaking in all of the press, all of the social media. I watched every single one of Kiernan Forbes's tweets. I listened to them, I read them. I did a lot of social media research because that is another character in the book. For me, the character of social media is like the beast that lurks beneath. It's a real reflection of us. And what Marianne I've been finding really interesting is all the stuff I've been speaking about in the book about social media, the kangaroo court of justice, of mob justice, that's been leveled at me in the last week. So it's been amazing how it's been like playing out against the book, but it's actually in the book. So there's this kind of weird mirror going on. Look, I spoke to Moses Tembe. I did. I mean, there's also conflicting, reports that Moses, a spokesperson, said he didn't contribute or didn't commission. I must make it very clear, nobody paid me for this book. It wasn't a case of Herman Mashaba and Prince. There was no money passed to me, as much as people are accusing me of that. I spoke to Anele's father. I would have loved to have engaged more with Lynn Forbes and Tony Forbes. That didn't happen. They've put a statement out saying they want nothing to do with this book, and that's their prerogative. I spoke to a lot of people some people, let's say not huge amounts, but some people who were brave enough from Kiernan's inner circle to speak to me. I read a lot. I also imagined a lot in this book. And that's not to say it's not accurate, but you have to say that Kiernan Forbes and Anele Thamm were the only two people who knew what really went on in that room that night. So there is a certain amount where you have to go, what if? And those questions I ask in the book, I think are very powerful questions.
You've had your life threatened as well. Has that happened with any other book?
People were kind of weird to me around the Angelo Grizzi book, but not about threatening my life. I mean, there's one Facebook, I've taken a screenshot in case they delete it, but I've been tagged to the Kaba Brother Taxi page saying, get your snipers, this woman's causing trouble. That's a scary thing for me. I don't know what they mean by that.
Melinda, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for writing the book. The kind of attack that you have means that the book has hit a chord somewhere in a country where we have GBV and violence, which is awful and we're all afraid of it. And perhaps when we need to confront it, when people we love die, it gets a bit difficult. So start keeping care. You're not going to stop writing, I think.
No, I want to write Leaked the week I became the most hated woman in South Africa, but I don't know if I'm going to really do that.
It's, you waste your time.
Yeah.
And lovely, your grey cells on something
Yes.
else. So thanks, Melinda, for coming in and setting those parameters. And those of you who want to find out a bit more, it's not a salacious book. I do think it asks questions, and if there are objections, don't read it. So thank you very much for joining us all, and see you next time.